I knew it was going to be a bad morning the second I stepped outside. There she was, Karen, hands on her hips, glaring across the street, like I'd just committed a federal crime by daring to mow my lawn at 7 a.m. sharp. Words flew faster than a summer storm. "That grass is uneven. Totally unacceptable," she barked, pointing at my carefully manicured yard like I had personally insulted her family lineage. I've dealt with neighborhood busybodies before, but Karen wasn't just picky. She was relentless. Every weekend, she found some new reason to complain. My flowers were too colorful, my walkway slightly crooked. Even my garden gnome's stance offended her, and the HOA backed her, sending letters that were basically tiny novels of passive-aggressive doom. At first, I tried reasoning with her. I offered to trim the edges to perfection, promised to rake every stray leaf, even adjusted my sprinklers to spray in perfectly straight lines. None of it worked. The next morning, she'd be back, clipboard in hand, scowling like a storm cloud on a sunny day. Then one night, while scrolling aimlessly through social media, it hit me. What if I didn't fight her with words, or letters, or emails, but with something completely harmless, completely unexpected? Something fun? A little harmless chaos to match her chaotic energy. I pictured it in my head, her stepping onto my lawn, confident and righteous, only to be greeted by bubbles. Thousands of floating, glimmering bubbles that would cling, pop, and annoy, but never hurt. A harmless bubble ambush. I immediately started planning. I bought a high-powered bubble gun, one of those machines that churns out bubbles. Like a bubble factory on steroids. I stocked up on extra bubble solution, the kind that made giant, iridescent orbs that hovered like tiny soap planets. Then I mapped out strategic positions along my yard. Every angle she could take would be covered. It had to look spontaneous, but really, it would be a masterpiece of suburban warfare. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I went to bed that night grinning like a kid plotting the ultimate prank. Little did Karen know, her next visit would be unforgettable and harmlessly hilarious. I couldn't wait to see her face when she stepped onto my lawn and got swallowed by a rainbow storm of bubbles. But I also knew I had to execute it perfectly. Timing, placement, and stealth were everything. One misstep and it could just be awkward, or worse, she'd report me to the HOA and I'd have weeks of hell to endure. Tomorrow, the lawn war would officially begin. The morning sunlight hit my lawn like a spotlight, and I knew Karen's arrival was imminent. My bubble guns were charged, strategically hidden behind the rose bushes, the garden gnomes, and even tucked behind my inflatable flamingo. Every angle she could approach from was covered, and I could barely contain my excitement. This was going to be legendary. Around 7:15 a.m., I heard the telltale click of her heels on the sidewalk. I peeked through the blinds, and there she was, clipboard in hand, glaring at my lawn with the intensity of a drill sergeant inspecting cadets. She had no idea what was coming. My pulse quickened as I gripped the remote trigger for the bubble guns. She marched right onto the grass, reciting her usual litany of complaints about weeds, uneven patches, and the supposedly aggressive tilt of my garden gnome. I held my breath, waiting for the perfect moment. As she leaned over to measure the spacing between my daisies, I hit the trigger. Instantly, a torrent of bubbles erupted from behind the bushes. They cascaded around her feet, clung to her shoes, and bounced off her clipboard. Karen froze, mid-sentence, her mouth open like she couldn't process what was happening. And then, she tried to stomp through them. Big mistake. Every step she took only created more bubbles, sending tiny iridescent orbs flying in every direction. I couldn't help it. I laughed quietly behind the curtains, the kind of laugh that was part mischief, part pure satisfaction. Karen was flailing, trying to shoo away the bubbles, like they were some kind of living creatures. Her scowl started to falter, replaced by a look that was equal parts horror and disbelief. The best part? It was completely harmless. No damage, no mess, just a ridiculous, sparkling nuisance. I had achieved perfect suburban revenge, but Karen's pride wouldn't let her surrender so easily. She started muttering about HOA rules, violations, and even unacceptable pranks. But the bubbles had already stolen her thunder. Every threat she made got drowned out by a rainbow of floating spheres. I realized something in that moment. There's a difference between winning a fight and winning a moment of pure joy. I had turned frustration into amusement, annoyance into art, and Karen, as much as she tried to maintain her composure, had become part of the spectacle. By the time she finally stomped off, dripping with soap bubbles, I knew the legend of the bubble ambush would be one for the neighborhood's history books. I let her retreat in silence, savoring the sweet satisfaction of a harmless victory. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Karen wouldn't go quietly. Tomorrow she would be back, plotting her next move, and I had to be ready. I thought I had seen it all, but Karen is nothing if not persistent. The very next morning, I spotted her peeking over the hedge, notebook in hand, plotting her retaliation. She wasn't coming with words this time. Oh no. She was armed with strategy, determination, and probably a magnifying glass to inspect every blade of grass. I decided to up my game. Bubble guns were great for an ambush, but they weren't going to cut it if she came prepared. I needed a plan that was creative, harmless, and guaranteed to keep her guessing. Inspiration hit while I was refilling the bubble solution. Why not add some music to the chaos? Not just any music, though. I wanted something dramatic, cinematic, the kind that made you feel like you had walked into a high-stakes spy movie. I set up small hidden Bluetooth speakers around the yard, then I synchronized them with my bubble guns. Now, whenever a gun fired, a triumphant, almost absurd soundtrack would blast. Imagine Karen, scowling, stepping onto my lawn, and suddenly being greeted by bubbles and the dramatic swell of orchestral music. It was brilliant. Karen stepped onto the lawn like a general inspecting enemy territory. Her eyes narrowed, scanning for any sign of ambush. I held my breath, ready to unleash the spectacle. And then, boom! The first bubble gun went off. Bubbles swarmed around her feet, while the speakers filled the air with heroic fanfare, making her every flail look like part of an over-the-top action scene. She froze, her mouth agape, as bubbles clung to her hair, her clipboard, even her sunglasses. The soundtrack hit a dramatic crescendo, and she spun, trying to escape. But more bubbles came from every direction. She was now part of a harmless yet epic suburban production, one that she hadn't auditioned for. I tried to stifle my laughter, but it was impossible. Her attempts to dodge the bubbles were futile, turning her into a flailing, almost cartoonish figure of fury and disbelief. Neighbors peeking from behind their curtains probably thought some strange street theater had started. By the time Karen stormed off, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was performance art, a harmless way to reclaim joy from a relentless complainer. And as I cleaned up the aftermath, I knew one thing for certain. Karen's obsession with my lawn had officially become the source of my weekend entertainment. But as I admired my perfectly manicured grass, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. She was clever, tenacious, and now infuriated. Tomorrow could bring something new, something even more ridiculous. The next morning, I braced myself. Karen wasn't just back. She was practically marching with a battle plan. I could see it in her eyes. Spreadsheets, HOA citations, and a level of determination that could probably topple small nations. But I was ready. I had learned from the previous days. The key wasn't just bubbles, it was unpredictability. I upgraded my arsenal. In addition to the bubble guns and dramatic music, I added a few harmless surprises. Glitter bombs hidden behind potted plants, motion-activated sprinklers that could trigger a sudden mist, and even a remote-controlled bubble cannon. I had dubbed the Bubble Overlord. My lawn had officially become a fortress of fun. Karen strutted onto the yard, clipboard raised, muttering about property violations and garden etiquette. I held my breath and hit the remote. Instantly, a flurry of bubbles erupted, glistening in the morning sun. The music blasted from the hidden speakers, making her every stomp sound like a villain's dramatic entrance in a movie trailer. She recoiled, trying to dodge, but then, glitter. Tiny sparkles clung to her clothes and shoes, reflecting sunlight like a disco ball. She gasped, flailed, and shouted something about unacceptable HOA sabotage. Activated the sprinklers, sending a gentle mist that made the bubbles cling and swirl, turning my lawn into a shimmering bubble wonderland. Karen's fury was unmatched, but she was trapped in a harmless spectacle. Every attempt to storm forward only triggered more chaos. Bubbles, glitter, and the triumphant soundtrack. I watched from my porch, laughing until my cheeks hurt. She was now less a HOA tyrant and more a star of her own absurd comedy. Finally, after several minutes of theatrical struggle, she stomped off, dripping with bubble solution, glitter stuck in her hair, muttering about rules and nuisances. My yard was intact, my plants unharmed, and I had officially won the suburban showdown. The victory wasn't just in the prank, it was in reclaiming peace and joy in my own space. As I surveyed the aftermath, I realized something deeper. Sometimes the best way to deal with relentless negativity isn't confrontation, it's creativity. By turning Karen's obsession into harmless amusement, I didn't just defend my lawn. I transformed frustration into laughter, annoyance into art, and for once, my weekend mornings were truly mine again. From that day on, Karen approached my yard cautiously, aware that any misstep could trigger the next legendary bubble ambush. And I enjoyed my lawn like never before, knowing that joy and bubbles can triumph over even the fiercest HOA complaints. The lawn war was over, but the story would live on in neighborhood legend. Thanks for watching! If you loved seeing Karen get her bubble-filled comeuppance, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my crazy HOA adventures. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the chaos, and drop a comment below. Tell me what prank you'd pull on a nosy neighbor. Your ideas might even inspire the next video.